On a quiet winter night, deep in a snow-covered forest, a Navy SEAL lived alone in a small wooden cabin. He had chosen silence over crowds and snow over noise. Then came a knock. When he opened the door, he didn't find danger. He found an old woman, shaking from the cold, and a German shepherd clutched tightly in her arms. She said she needed help. The dog said nothing, but its eyes told a very different story. Before the sun rose, that single act of kindness would pull him into a secret buried beneath the snow. And if you believe that loyalty still matters, that courage can come on four legs, and that some rescues change both lives, please subscribe to the channel and stay with us until the end, because this Navy SEAL rescue dog story will prove that even in the coldest winter, some bonds are unbreakable. Bozeman, Montana, was the kind of city that looked peaceful from a distance in winter, its streets softened by white snow and pale morning light. But anyone who lived there knew how unforgiving the season could be. When winter truly settled in, it didn't knock politely. It pressed down with heavy skies, biting winds, and nights so cold they felt alive. Beyond the city limits, where the lights thinned and the road dissolved into forest, the cold ruled without apology. That was where John Miller lived, far from neighbors, far from noise, in a single-story log cabin tucked among tall pines that had learned to bend without breaking. John Miller was 38 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, built not like a bodybuilder, but like someone shaped by years of function rather than appearance. His face was angular, with a strong jawline and high cheekbones that cast deep shadows when the firelight caught them. A short, neatly trimmed beard framed his mouth, dark with faint threads of gray that had appeared sooner than they should have. His eyes were a calm, weathered blue, the kind that noticed details without looking for attention. He had been a Navy SEAL for nearly 2 decades, and though he had left the service, the uniform never truly left him. Even now, alone in the woods, he wore his Navy working uniform, the digital camouflage continuous across the jacket and pockets without interruption, as if habit and discipline refused to loosen their grip. The uniform was clean, worn with intention, not nostalgia. John lived alone by choice, though the reason behind that choice was layered. Years earlier, a mission gone wrong had ended with silence where voices should have been. No memorial plaque, no ceremony could erase that moment. It didn't make him bitter, but it made him quieter. With people, he was polite, reserved, direct. With himself, he was honest to a fault. The cabin was not an escape. It was a place where his thoughts could finally finish their sentences. That night, snow had been falling since sunset, thick and steady, muffling the forest until even the wind seemed cautious. The temperature had dropped well below freezing, the kind of cold that cracked lips and stiffened joints. John had just finished stacking firewood near the hearth when he heard it. A sound, faint at first, carried through the stillness. Not the snap of a branch or the call of an animal. This was deliberate, human. He paused, listening. The sound came again, a knock. John straightened slowly, muscles responding before his mind did. He moved toward the door without panic, but without hesitation either. The porch light cast a warm yellow circle onto the snow as he opened the door. Cold air rushed in, sharp and immediate, but what stood before him pulled his attention away from the sting. On the wooden porch stood an elderly woman, small in frame, her body slightly bent forward as if the wind itself had been pushing against her for years. Her name, he would soon learn, was Mary Thompson. She looked to be in her late 70s or early 80s, with silver-white hair pulled back into a loose bun that had begun to unravel. Strands clung to her pale cheeks, damp with melting snow. Her skin was thin and weathered, marked by fine lines that spoke of both laughter and hardship. She wore a long wool coat that had once been navy blue, but had faded into something closer to gray, buttoned crookedly as if her hands had been shaking when she fastened it. Mary's eyes were the most striking thing about her. Light brown, clouded slightly with age, but sharp with fear. Not confusion, fear. She clutched something to her chest with both arms, holding it, as though letting go might cause it to vanish. It was a dog, a German shepherd, traditional black and tan coloring, its coat thick and heavy with snow along the spine and ears. The dog looked young, perhaps 2 or 3 years old, full-grown but not old enough to have lost the restless energy that lingered even in its stillness. Its body was pressed tightly against Mary's, muscles rigid, head turned slightly so one dark eye could watch John without blinking. The dog's ears were upright, alert, and its breath came out in quick white clouds. There was intelligence in its gaze and tension. This was not a stray that had wandered in by accident. Mary spoke first, her voice trembling but clear. "Please," she said. "I don't know how much longer he can stay out here." John took a step back, widening the doorway. He did not ask questions yet. He did not need to. He nodded once and said, "Come inside." The warmth of the cabin wrapped around them as they entered, the fire crackling low in the hearth. Mary exhaled shakily, her shoulders dropping a fraction as if the weight of the cold had finally released its grip. John closed the door behind them, locking it out of habit, then turned his attention fully to his unexpected guests. Mary lowered herself carefully onto a wooden chair near the fire, moving slowly, stiffly. Up close, John could see the tremor in her hands, the faint blue veins beneath her skin. The German Shepherd did not leave her side. When John knelt to place another log on the fire, the dog shifted slightly, positioning itself between Mary and him, not aggressive, but protective. "It's all right," John said quietly, his voice calm and even. He had learned long ago that volume was rarely necessary. "You're safe here." Mary nodded, though her eyes drifted toward the window, toward the dark forest beyond the glass. "Thank you," she said. "I didn't know where else to go." John studied her without staring. She did not look homeless. She looked like someone who belonged somewhere else and had been forced away from it. There were no visible injuries, but exhaustion sat heavily on her posture. "And him?" John asked, nodding toward the dog. "This is Max," Mary replied after a brief pause. Her fingers tightened slightly in the dog's fur as she spoke his name. Max's ears flicked, but his gaze never left the window. John straightened and crossed the room slowly, deliberately, until he stood near the front window. Outside, snow reflected the porch light, turning the world into a pale, glowing field. That was when he saw them. Footprints. Not just one set, but several, partially filled by falling snow, but still unmistakable. They did not lead toward the house. They led away from it, straight into the forest. His expression did not change, but something behind his eyes sharpened. Behind him, Max let out a low, quiet sound, barely a growl, barely a warning. Mary noticed it too. Her breath caught, and she hugged the dog closer. John did not turn back right away. He memorized the direction of the tracks, the spacing, the weight they suggested. Whoever had been there had not come by accident. When he finally turned to face them again, his voice was steady. "You can stay here tonight," he said. "We'll talk in the morning." Mary nodded, relief and fear tangled together in her expression. Outside, the snow kept falling, erasing evidence slowly, deliberately. But John knew one thing with certainty. Whatever had brought Mary and her dog to his door had not ended when the knocking stopped. John moved with quiet efficiency, the kind that came from years of habit rather than urgency. He set another log into the hearth and adjusted it until the fire caught properly, the flames rising higher and brighter, throwing steady light across the cabin's wooden walls. The warmth spread slowly but surely, pushing back the cold that clung to Mary Thompson's coat and seeped from Max's snow-damp fur. Mary remained seated near the fire, her hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug John had filled with warm water first, careful not to overwhelm her with heat. Up close, the lines on her face seemed deeper, not harsh, but lived in, carved by decades of quiet endurance. She was a small woman, barely reaching John's shoulder when standing, with a frame that suggested she had once been sturdier before age had gently worn her down. Her posture was guarded, shoulders slightly hunched, as if she had learned to make herself smaller in the presence of danger. Max stayed pressed against her knee, his black and tan coat already beginning to dry, revealing a strong, well-kept build. He was lean but powerful, with a broad chest and long legs that hinted at speed and stamina. His muzzle was dark, with a faint scar near the bridge of his nose that suggested an old injury, healed but not forgotten. His eyes were alert, intelligent, and restless, tracking every movement in the room before returning again and again to the front window. When the fire popped sharply, Max flinched only slightly, then settled back into a low, tense crouch. He was not afraid of the cabin. He was listening for something beyond it. John noticed everything without appearing to. He pulled a wool blanket from a shelf and draped it gently over Mary's shoulders. She stiffened at the touch, then relaxed once she realized what he was doing. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice thin but steady. There was gratitude there, but also restraint, as if she were careful not to invite too many questions too soon. "You said you were lost," John said calmly, taking a seat across from her, far enough not to crowd her, close enough to be present. His tone was neutral, neither pressing nor distant. That's a long way from town to wander this far out in a storm. Mary lowered her gaze to the mug in her hands. Her fingers trembled slightly despite the growing warmth. I took a wrong turn, she said after a pause. It happens more easily than people think, especially when the snow comes down like this. It was a reasonable answer, too reasonable. John nodded once, not challenging her, but not accepting it fully either. Years in the field had taught him that the most dangerous lies were the ones that almost made sense. Mary's eyes flicked up briefly to meet his, then away again, settling instead on Max's head as she stroked behind his ears with slow, repetitive motions. It was not the gesture of someone calming a nervous dog. It was the gesture of someone grounding herself. Max shifted at the sound of John's boots against the floorboards as he stood and moved toward the window again. Outside, the forest remained still, the snow continuing its steady descent. The footprints he had seen earlier were already softening at the edges, slowly being claimed by the night. He leaned closer to the glass, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved, no sound carried over the wind. Still, the sense of being observed lingered like a pressure at the base of his neck. Behind him, Mary spoke again, more quietly this time. He doesn't like closed spaces when there's danger nearby, she said, nodding toward Max. John turned back to her. You sound certain. Mary hesitated. The fire cracked, filling the silence between them. He's always been good at knowing when something's wrong, she said at last. Better than most people. There was history in that sentence. John filed it away without comment. He fetched a shallow bowl from the kitchen and poured water into it, setting it gently on the floor near Max. The dog sniffed it once, then ignored it, eyes still fixed on the window. You can use the guest room, John said. It's small, but it's warm. Mary nodded, relief flickering across her face before she masked it again. That's very kind of you. I won't be any trouble. We'll be gone in the morning. Max let out a low sound at that, not a growl exactly, but something close. Mary's hand tightened in his fur. John noticed the exchange. There's no rush, he said. Storm like this, roads won't be clear until daylight anyway. Mary did not answer right away. She stood slowly, using the arm of the chair for support. Up close, John could see the faint bruising on her wrist, mostly hidden beneath the sleeve of her coat. It was old enough to be yellowing, not fresh, but not ancient either. She noticed his glance and subtly pulled the blanket tighter around herself. The guest room was simple, with a narrow bed, a small dresser, and a single window looking out into the trees. John set an extra blanket on the bed and adjusted the thermostat slightly before stepping back. Bathroom's down the hall, he said. I'll be up for a while. Mary gave him a small, tired smile. You don't sleep much, do you? John returned the smile, brief and faint. Not in storms. She nodded as if that made perfect sense. As John turned to leave, Max followed him to the doorway, then stopped, looking back at Mary. After a moment's hesitation, the dog returned to her side, positioning himself between her and the door. John closed the door gently behind them and returned to the main room. He poured himself a cup of black coffee and sat at the small wooden table, his back to the wall, facing the front door and the window by instinct. Outside, the forest remained quiet, but the silence felt deliberate now, stretched too tight. Minutes passed, perhaps 20. John was just beginning to think that whatever tension lingered might fade with the night when Max barked once, sharp and sudden, from the guest room. Mary's voice followed, hushed but urgent. Max! John was on his feet instantly. Before he reached the hallway, a flicker of movement caught his eye. Outside the front window, far beyond the porch light's reach, something glinted briefly between the trees. A flash, no longer than a heartbeat. White, then gone. Headlights. They didn't sweep across the clearing or approach the cabin. They appeared, paused, and vanished, swallowed by the forest. Whoever it was knew the terrain well enough to move without announcing themselves. Max barked again, deeper this time, his voice carrying a warning that raised the hair along John's arms. Mary emerged from the guest room, her face pale, her composure cracking. "They're here," she whispered, the words barely audible. John did not ask who. He crossed to the window again, eyes scanning the darkness where the light had appeared. Nothing now but snow and trees. Still, the sense of threat had sharpened, crystallized into something unmistakable. "You said you were lost," John said quietly, without turning to face her. "People who are lost don't usually get followed this far." Mary closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, the fear was still there, but something else had joined it. Resolve. "I didn't mean to involve you," she said. "I just needed somewhere safe, somewhere they wouldn't expect." Max moved to John's side, standing tall now, ears forward, body taut. The dog's gaze remained fixed on the forest, tracking what human eyes could not. John reached for the jacket he had draped over the back of the chair, pulling it on without breaking eye contact with the window. "We'll talk more when it's light," he said. "For now, stay away from the windows." Outside, the snow kept falling, erasing the last trace of the headlights as if they had never been there at all. But John knew better. Someone had been close enough to watch, close enough to wait, and whatever Mary Thompson had carried with her into the storm had not yet finished unfolding. Morning came without mercy. The storm had not weakened overnight. It had thickened, layering the forest in heavy white silence. The sky was bright but cold, a pale steel blue that reflected off the snow so sharply it made the eyes ache. Light filled the cabin through the windows, clean and unforgiving, revealing every detail the night had softened. John Miller woke before the sun cleared the trees, as he always did, sitting up slowly on the edge of the chair where he had dozed rather than slept. His body felt the cold before his mind acknowledged it, muscles tightening, senses sharpening. Outside, the wind had eased, but the air carried that brittle stillness that followed a long snowfall, the kind that made sound travel farther than it should. Max was already awake. The German shepherd stood rigid near the front door, black and tan coat catching the morning light, ears pointed forward like compass needles locked on a single direction. His tail was still, his weight shifted slightly toward the door, as if his body had decided to move before permission had been given. When John took a step toward him, Max let out a short, urgent bark, sharp enough to slice through the quiet cabin. Mary emerged from the guest room moments later, wrapped in the borrowed wool blanket, her silver hair loose around her shoulders now, revealing how thin her face truly was in daylight. She looked smaller than she had the night before, diminished by exhaustion and fear that had never fully left her eyes. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and the fine tremor in her hands returned the moment Max barked again. "What is it?" she asked, her voice hushed but tight. Max did not wait for permission. He pawed at the door once, hard, then looked back at John, eyes bright and demanding. There was no confusion in him, no hesitation. This was not curiosity. This was certainty. John pulled on his boots and reached for his jacket, the Navy working uniform already familiar against his skin. He placed a hand briefly on Mary's shoulder, grounding but gentle. "Stay behind me," he said. It was not a suggestion. She nodded, swallowing hard. The door opened with a soft creak and the cold rushed in, immediate and biting. Snow lay piled thick on the porch, untouched except for the faint indentations Max had left the night before. The world beyond the cabin looked deceptively peaceful, sunlight glinting off the white ground, the pines standing tall and unmoving. Max bounded forward, barking again, louder this time, pulling John's attention downward. There, just beyond the edge of the porch, was the first sign, a faint smear in the snow, pink at first glance, almost delicate. Blood, diluted by melting crystals, stretched thin across the surface. John crouched, gloved fingers hovering just above it, his jaw tightening. A few feet farther, the snow was disturbed, scuffed in a way that didn't match animal tracks. Something heavy had been dragged, leaving a shallow groove that cut across the pristine white like a wound. Mary gasped behind him. The sound was small, but it carried weight. She stepped forward before John could stop her, one hand clutching the blanket, the other pressed to her chest. When she saw the marks clearly, her knees buckled. John caught her by the arm before she fell, steadying her as her breath came in short, uneven pulls. "I told you," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "I knew he'd find it." Max moved along the trail, nose low, following the disturbed snow with focused intensity. He paused, sniffed again, then barked sharply toward the tree line. John followed the direction of the dog's gaze. The trail led away from the cabin, angling toward the thicker forest, where shadows pooled, even in the morning light. "Mary," John said quietly, helping her back onto the porch bench. "You need to tell me what you haven't." She pressed her lips together, eyes fixed on the blood-stained snow as if it might speak for her. When she finally looked up, something had shifted in her expression. The fear was still there, but beneath it was a resignation that felt heavier. "I didn't bring trouble here on purpose," she said. "But trouble has a way of following when it thinks you know something." Before John could respond, Max barked again, louder, more insistent, his body vibrating with tension. He trotted a few steps farther from the porch, then stopped abruptly, pawing at the snow. John approached slowly, scanning the area. Beneath the fresh layer of white was another smear of blood, darker this time, less diluted. Whoever had passed through here had been injured more than slightly. Mary's hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes brimmed, not with surprise, but with recognition. "He was bleeding," she said, voice breaking. "I didn't see him, but I heard him, last night, after the knocking stopped." John turned to her sharply. "You heard someone outside after I closed the door?" She nodded, tears slipping free now. Footsteps, heavy ones. "He was trying not to be heard." Max growled low, a sound that came from deep in his chest, and then froze. His ears twitched. His head snapped toward the far end of the clearing. John followed his line of sight, heart rate quickening. At first, there was nothing. Then, faint but unmistakable, a sound carried through the trees. An engine. Not close, not yet, but approaching. The sound faded for a moment, swallowed by distance and terrain, then returned, stronger. Max barked again, pacing now, agitation replacing precision. John scanned the horizon, eyes narrowing. The sound was wrong for a single vehicle moving cautiously. It was uneven, layered. Mary heard it too, her face drained of what little color remained. "That's not one," she said, her voice barely audible. The engine noise grew louder, then split, echoing from different directions as if the forest itself were amplifying it. John counted silently. One, then another. At least two vehicles, possibly more, their engines muffled but persistent. John stepped back onto the porch, placing himself between Mary and the forest. "Inside," he said firmly. "Now." Mary hesitated only a second before obeying, Max close at her side but resisting slightly, still intent on the trail. John shut the door behind them, locking it, then moved to the window, peering through the glass. The trees stood unmoved, but the sound was undeniable now. Multiple engines, slow, deliberate, searching. Max stood beside him, hackles raised, muscles coiled, eyes fixed on the same unseen point beyond the clearing. He was no longer reacting, he was anticipating. Mary sank into the chair, hands shaking uncontrollably. "They're not looking for me," she said, almost to herself. "They're looking for what I saw. And for him." John did not ask who. The blood in the snow had already answered part of that question. Outside, the engines continued their slow approach, drawing nearer with each passing second. The forest, bright and beautiful moments earlier, now felt like a trap, its silence broken by the mechanical growl of something that did not belong. John rested one hand lightly on Max's back, feeling the strength beneath the dog's fur, the steady heat of a creature that knew its purpose. Whatever had happened last night had not ended with a knock at the door. It had only begun. And now, in the clear light of morning, the consequences were closing in from every direction. The engines did not rush in. They idled at a distance, circling, testing the edges of the clearing as if the forest itself were a map only they could read. Snow continued to fall in fine, dry grains that glittered in the morning light, bright enough to reveal everything yet dense enough to blur intention. John Miller closed the front door softly and turned the deadbolt with care, the metallic click sounding louder than it should have in the quiet cabin. Mary stood a few steps back, clutching the blanket around her shoulders, her breathing shallow and controlled, as though she had learned long ago how to keep fear from spilling outward. Max planted himself at John's side, tall and alert, black and tan coat bristling, eyes locked on the window where the sound had last come from. John moved with the calm precision that had once been drilled into him under far harsher conditions. He guided Mary toward the back of the cabin, past the small kitchen, and into a narrow storage room that doubled as a pantry. It smelled faintly of pine and dried herbs. "Stay here," he said quietly, opening the door and easing her inside. "No windows. If you hear anything, don't move." Mary met his eyes, searching his face for reassurance. He did not offer promises he could not keep, only a steady nod. She returned it, lips pressed together, and Max hesitated at the threshold before John gestured him back. "With me," John murmured. The dog obeyed instantly, positioning himself close, shoulder nearly touching John's leg. John crossed back into the main room and pulled his old pack from beneath the table. It was scuffed and faded, the kind of wear earned rather than neglected. He shrugged into it and tightened the straps, checking the contents by touch alone. A flashlight, a first aid kit, a compact radio that hadn't been used in years. The weight of the pack settled him. He slipped on his jacket, the Navy working uniform fitting like a second skin, its continuous digital camouflage pattern unbroken, familiar. He did not dress for intimidation. He dressed for readiness. Max followed every movement, his head turning in short, precise arcs, ears flicking at sounds John could not yet hear. When the first vehicle came into view through the front window, Max's muscles tightened visibly. It was a dark SUV, matte black, no plates, moving slowly along the tree line with deliberate caution. Then another appeared farther back, angled differently, as if coordinating coverage. The engines cut briefly, then resumed, low and controlled. This was not a search party. This was a perimeter. John's jaw set. He understood then, fully, what the night had been circling around. Mary and the dog had not simply crossed paths with trouble. They were the reason it had come this far out. He moved to the side window and peered through a narrow gap in the curtain. A third vehicle rolled to a stop behind a stand of pines, partially concealed, its tires crunching softly over packed snow. The spacing was methodical. Whoever was out there knew how to move without drawing attention, how to close in without closing too fast. John felt the old instincts rise, sharp and clear, not panic, but focus. A shape detached itself from the shadow of the nearest trees. A man stepped forward cautiously, boots sinking into the snow with each measured step. He was tall, perhaps in his early 40s, broad-shouldered beneath a heavy winter coat that looked expensive and new. His face was clean-shaven, angular, with a narrow mouth that rarely smiled. Dark hair peeked from beneath a knit cap pulled low. His posture was alert but not tense, the confidence of someone accustomed to giving orders rather than receiving them. In his gloved hand was a handheld radio held loosely, thumb resting near the transmit button. He paused every few steps, scanning the cabin, the porch, the surrounding trees. Max let out a low growl, barely audible, a vibration more than a sound. John placed a steadying hand on the dog's back, fingers pressing lightly into the thick fur. "Easy," he whispered. Max did not relax, but he held. The man stopped just short of the porch, his breath fogging in the cold air. He lifted the radio slightly and spoke into it, voice too low for words to carry, then tilted his head as if listening to a response. John recognized the cadence immediately. Professional, coordinated, the kind of voice that didn't waste syllables. John shifted his stance, positioning himself where he could see the man clearly while keeping the rest of the cabin out of view. He did not reach for a weapon because he did not have one. He did not need one to understand the stakes. Outside, the man raised his gaze and looked directly at the window. Their eyes met through the glass, and for a brief moment, neither moved. There was curiosity in the man's expression, not surprise. He had expected someone to be home. John opened the door before the man could knock. Cold air swept in again, carrying with it the smell of snow and fuel. He stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind him, placing himself squarely between the cabin and the stranger. Max stayed just inside, visible through the glass, his silhouette alert and imposing. "Mornin'," the man said evenly, his voice calm, almost polite. Up close, John could see the faint scar near the man's right eyebrow, thin and pale, the kind left by a blade or shrapnel long-heeled. There was no visible weapon, but John had learned long ago that the absence of one meant nothing. "Didn't mean to startle you." "You didn't," John replied. His tone matched the man's, neutral, controlled. "Private property." The man nodded, as if acknowledging a shared understanding. "Understood. We're just passing through. One of our vehicles broke down last night. We're looking for a place to turn around." He gestured vaguely toward the trees. The explanation was smooth, practiced. John held his gaze. "Road ends a mile back." The man's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "So I hear." He glanced past John toward the cabin interior. "You live out here alone?" John did not answer immediately. Silence stretched thin and deliberate. "I do," he said finally. The man's eyes flicked briefly to the window where Max stood, then back to John. "Dog looks alert." "He is," John said. Keeps the wildlife honest. A pause. Snow drifted between them, settling on the porch rail on the man's shoulders. The radio crackled softly in the man's hand. He listened, then nodded once to himself. "Well," he said, stepping back slightly, "we won't bother you any longer. Appreciate your time." He turned as if to leave, then stopped. "If you happen to see an older gentleman pass through here," he added casually, "injured, confused, might be looking for help, give us a call." He held up the radio briefly, then tucked it back into his coat. "He's not dangerous," he lied smoothly. "Just needs medical attention." John did not respond. He watched as the man retreated toward the trees, his steps retracing their path without haste. When the figure disappeared into the forest, the engines resumed, shifting positions, tightening the ring. Inside, Mary pressed her ear to the storage room door, every sound amplified by fear. She didn't emerge until John tapped twice, softly. When she stepped out, her face was drawn, eyes bright with unshed tears. "They found us," she said. "They found the area," John corrected. "Not you. Not yet." Max moved to Mary's side, leaning into her leg, his presence grounding. John looked from the woman to the dog, then back to the window where the vehicles continued their slow, deliberate dance. He understood now, fully. Whatever secret Mary carried, whatever Max knew, had drawn professionals into the snow, and they would not leave until they were sure they had it. Outside, the man with the radio paused once more at the edge of the trees and glanced back at the cabin, his expression unreadable. John met his gaze again, unblinking. The ring tightened, silent and patient, and the forest held its breath. The forest did not move, but it listened. After the man with the radio withdrew into the trees, the engines shifted again, settling into positions that felt deliberate rather than random. John closed the door carefully and leaned his weight against it for a moment, eyes half-lidded, listening past the walls. Max remained rigid, head angled toward the direction the stranger had vanished, his breathing slow but deep. A working animal holding himself in check. Mary stood near the table, hands clasped together so tightly her knuckles had gone white, the borrowed blanket slipping from one shoulder without her noticing. The cabin felt smaller now, as if the cold outside had pressed inward, compressing the space until secrets could no longer breathe. John broke the silence first. "You said they're not looking for you," he said quietly. "They're looking for what you saw, and for him." He did not need to clarify who him was. Mary's reaction told him enough. Her shoulders sagged and she lowered herself into the chair with care, as though her strength had been holding on by a thread that had finally frayed. "I never meant for any of this," she said, her voice hoarse. "I thought if I stayed quiet long enough it would all pass." She stared at the floor, then at Max, who had moved closer to her again, pressing his flank against her leg. Her hand found his fur by instinct, fingers trembling as they sank into the thick black and tan coat. "He was my son's dog," she continued, the words coming more easily now that the first had been spoken. "Max belonged to my son." John took a seat across from her, posture open but alert. He did not interrupt. He had learned that confessions, once started, needed room to unfold. "His name was Daniel Thompson," Mary said. Saying it out loud seemed to cost her something. Daniel had been tall like his father, she explained, with a lean build that never quite filled out, even in his 30s. He had dark hair that curled slightly at the ends no matter how short he kept it, and a crooked smile that made him look younger than he was. His eyes, a warm hazel, were always searching, always noticing things other people missed. He had been gentle by nature, soft-spoken, the kind of man who apologized when someone bumped into him. That softness had not come easily. Years earlier, Daniel had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, witnessing a robbery that turned violent before he fully understood what he was seeing. He had survived that night, but it changed him. He stopped trusting crowds, stopped trusting systems. He trusted Max. Mary swallowed hard before continuing. "He didn't plan to be a hero," she said. "He just couldn't unsee what he'd seen." Daniel had come to her months ago, wounded in spirit long before his body bore any marks, and told her he had been contacted by federal agents. They wanted him to testify. They wanted names, locations, proof. He was afraid, but he believed that telling the truth mattered. He believed that if good people knew where to look, they would do the right thing. John's gaze drifted briefly to Max, who had settled into a sit beside Mary, eyes forward, ears still alert. The dog did not look like a pet listening to a sad story. He looked like a guardian waiting for instructions. Daniel didn't trust the agents completely, Mary said. Not after what he'd seen, so he kept a copy of everything, not just files, physical proof. She hesitated, then met John's eyes. He hid it, out here. Somewhere he thought only Max could lead someone to. John felt the shape of the truth forming, heavy and unmistakable. And when they came for him, he said. Mary nodded once, sharply. They didn't knock, they didn't warn him. He was hurt trying to get away. Her voice broke then, and she pressed her hand to her mouth, steadying herself. He came to me that night, bleeding, terrified. He knew he wouldn't last long. He told me to take Max and go. He said, if anyone good is left, Max will find them. Tears spilled freely now, tracing the lines of her face. He opened the back gate and told Max to run. Max didn't want to leave him. He never did. Max let out a low whine at the sound of Daniel's name, a sound that seemed to come from memory rather than instinct. His ears flattened briefly before lifting again, his gaze drifting toward the window, toward the forest, where the truth lay buried. John leaned forward, forearms resting on his knees. You followed Max here, he said. It was a statement, not a question. Mary nodded. I lost him once in the trees, thought I'd lost everything. Her fingers tightened in Max's fur. But he came back, led me to your porch, like he knew. John exhaled slowly through his nose. Years of training had taught him to compartmentalize, to keep emotions separate from action, but there was no denying the weight of what he was hearing. The dog was not just a witness. Max was a map. That's why they're circling, John said quietly. They know he's still alive. They know he leads somewhere. A sudden noise from outside cut through the room, sharp and metallic. Max's head snapped up, body going taut again. John stood in one smooth motion, moving to the window. The engines had gone quiet, too quiet. Snow continued to fall, bright and clean, but the forest felt wrong, as if it were holding its breath. Mary followed him, her face pale but resolute. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you hurt, she said. Daniel believed in people like you, men who still stand when others run. She straightened, the tremor in her hands easing as resolve took its place. If Max is the key, then you deserve to know. John did not respond immediately. He was listening again to something deeper than sound. Then it came. A crack. Sharp. Echoing. A gunshot. The sound ripped through the forest, startling birds from unseen branches. Max barked once, fierce and urgent, spinning toward the door. Mary gasped, clutching the edge of the table. The gunshot was followed by a second farther away, then the faint, chaotic noise of shouting carried on the wind. John's expression hardened, the last of any doubt falling away. They've found something, he said. Or someone. Max was already at the door, pawing at it, his entire body vibrating with purpose. The truth was no longer buried quietly beneath the snow. It had been disturbed. And now, in the bright, unforgiving light of morning, it was calling them into the forest, whether they were ready or not. The gunshot echoed once more, then dissolved into the forest like a stone dropped into deep water. John did not wait for a third. He moved fast, decisive, the years of training snapping into place without conscious thought. He crossed the cabin in long strides, pulling the back door open just enough to peer out before motioning Mary forward. We leave now, he said, low and steady. They're close, and they're not guessing anymore. Mary nodded, fear tightening her features but not slowing her steps. She pulled her coat tight, the wool stiff with cold, and followed John without question. Max was already ahead of them, muscles coiled, ears forward, every instinct sharpened by urgency. The forest greeted them with blinding light. Snow reflected the morning sun so fiercely it seemed to glow, a white expanse broken only by dark trunks and the long blue shadows they cast. The cold cut deeper here, away from the shelter of the cabin, biting through fabric and into bone. Max bounded forward, nose low, then stopped abruptly, scanning the ground. He circled once, sniffed, then chose a direction with certainty, plunging between two pines where the snow lay less disturbed. John followed, keeping Mary close, his body angled protectively between her and the direction of the cabin. Mary moved slower than John would have liked, but she did not complain. Her age showed in her gait now, each step careful, deliberate. Her silver hair escaped its loose tie and whipped against her cheeks, and her breath came in short, controlled bursts. She was not frail in spirit, though. There was a stubborn resolve in the set of her jaw, the same resolve that had carried her through the loss of her son and into this frozen flight. "Max knows where he's going," she said, more statement than hope. "He does," John replied. He could see it in the dog's movement. Max did not wander or hesitate. He tracked with purpose, adjusting his course when the wind shifted, doubling back briefly to confirm, then surging ahead again. Snow sprayed from his powerful legs as he ran, black and tan coats stark against the white world. He was no longer just leading them. He was choosing their survival. Behind them, the forest answered with sound. Engines roared to life again, closer now, less careful. Shouting followed, indistinct but urgent, carried by the cold air. John felt the pressure of pursuit like a physical thing, tightening around his chest. He guided Mary over a fallen log, then through a narrow ravine where the snow lay deep and uneven. The terrain slowed them, but it would slow vehicles more. That was the point. Max stopped suddenly, hackles lifting. He barked once, sharp and commanding, then veered left, pulling them toward a stand of spruce where the branches hung low, heavy with snow. John ducked instinctively, drawing Mary down with him as a crack rang out behind them. A bullet tore through a branch overhead, sending a cascade of snow down in a blinding sheet. Mary cried out softly, more in shock than pain, but kept moving when John urged her forward. They pushed deeper, lungs burning, legs heavy. The forest thickened, the light breaking into fractured beams through the trees. John's boots sank with each step, his breath fogging thickly in front of him. He could hear Max's breathing now, too, fast but controlled, the sound of a working animal pushing his limits without crossing them. Another shot echoed, closer this time, followed by the unmistakable crunch of boots on snow. Mary stumbled, catching herself on John's arm. He steadied her, eyes scanning, mind calculating. They could not outrun trained men forever, not in this terrain. They needed cover. They needed the truth Max was leading them toward. Max slowed abruptly and turned back, barking urgently. He circled a massive pine ahead, its trunk wide and gnarled, roots twisting above the snow like the fingers of a buried giant. He began to dig, paws striking the packed snow with frantic energy, sending white powder flying. His bark changed pitch, higher, insistent, as if calling them closer. John reached the tree first, dropping to one knee. He brushed snow aside with gloved hands, feeling the uneven ground beneath. Mary stood just behind him, chest heaving, eyes wide. "This is it," she whispered. "This is where Daniel said to look, if Max ever brought someone here." Her voice broke, but she did not turn away. Before John could uncover more, a figure burst from the trees to their right. A man, tall and broad, face partially covered by a scarf, eyes hard and focused. He wore a dark tactical jacket, snow clinging to the fabric, and carried a rifle with practiced ease. His beard was thick, unkempt, streaked with gray, framing a mouth set in a permanent scowl. This was a man shaped by violence, not momentary desperation. His stance was aggressive, confident, the posture of someone who believed he was about to win. "Don't move," the man barked, raising the rifle. Behind him, another figure appeared, shorter, leaner, with sharp features and restless eyes that darted between John, Mary, and the digging dog. The second man looked younger, early 30s perhaps, clean-shaven, his jaw tight with tension. He held his weapon too tightly, knuckles white, betraying nerves beneath the bravado. John rose slowly, hands visible, placing himself squarely between the men and Mary. Max growled, deep and resonant, stepping in front of Mary despite her attempts to pull him back. Snow continued to fall, soft and relentless, muffling the world around them. "You're too late," the bearded man sneered, glancing at the disturbed snow by the tree. "We found the trail hours ago." He took a step closer, boots crunching loudly. "Hand over whatever he hid, and maybe you walk away." John met his gaze without flinching. "You don't want what's buried here," he said evenly. "You want what it leads to, and that's not something you can outrun." The younger man shifted uneasily, eyes flicking to the forest behind them as if listening for something else. "We don't have time for this," he muttered. "Sirens!" He stopped short, listening harder. For a moment the only sound was Max's growl and the soft hiss of falling snow. Then it came. Faint at first, but unmistakable. Sirens, distant but growing. The bearded man swore under his breath, raising his rifle again. "Finish it!" he snapped. Before he could fire, Max lunged. The German shepherd launched himself forward with explosive force, slamming into the man's legs and knocking him off balance. The shot went wild, cracking into the trees. John moved instantly, tackling the younger man and driving him into the snow, wresting the weapon from his grip. Mary screamed, a raw, broken sound, as the forest erupted into chaos. Max released the bearded man and bounded back, placing himself between John and the fallen rifle, barking furiously, teeth bared. The sirens grew louder now, unmistakable, cutting through the white wilderness like a promise and a threat. John hauled the younger man to his feet, shoving him back as blue and red lights flickered through the trees in the distance. The bearded man scrambled away, disappearing into the forest, his boots leaving a frantic trail behind him. Max returned to the pine, barking again, digging harder, as if urging them to remember why they had run in the first place. John knelt beside him, brushing away the snow until his fingers struck something solid beneath. Metal, cold, hidden. He looked up at Mary, who stood trembling but upright, tears freezing on her cheeks. "We're not done," he said quietly. Max barked once more, sharp and triumphant, paws scraping at the base of the tree as the sirens closed in and the truth waited just beneath the snow. The pine's roots clawed at the earth like frozen fingers, twisted and ancient, their tips breaking the snow in places where time had refused to bury them completely. John brushed away the last loose layer with his glove, breath coming slow and measured despite the chaos that had just torn through the forest. Beneath the packed white crust, his knuckles struck something hard and unyielding. Metal. He cleared more snow, revealing the corner of a dark, weathered container wedged tightly between the roots, exactly where Max had insisted they stop. Mary knelt beside him, ignoring the cold soaking through her coat. Her face had gone pale, but her eyes burned with a fierce, aching focus. "That's it," she whispered. "Daniel said it would be sealed. He said snow and time would protect it better than walls." Her voice trembled, not with fear now, but with the weight of finality. This was no longer a story she carried alone. John worked the container free, straining as it resisted before finally giving way with a dull scrape. It was a waterproof satchel, military grade, the kind designed to survive floods, fire, and neglect. Its surface was scratched and dulled, but the seals were intact. Max circled them once, tail stiff, ears pinned forward, then stopped and sat, eyes fixed on the bag as if guarding it. Snow fell steadily around them, soft and relentless, the forest momentarily quiet again, as though holding its breath. John opened the satchel just enough to confirm what lay inside. Bundles of cash wrapped tight in plastic, edges crisp and dry. Beneath them, a slim, shock-resistant case housing flash drives and a small data recorder, each labeled in Daniel's careful handwriting. Dates, locations, names, the kind of proof that didn't argue or negotiate. John closed the bag immediately. He didn't need to see more to understand the scope of it. Mary pressed a shaking hand to her mouth. Tears streaked down her cheeks, freezing as they fell. "He did it," she murmured. "He really did it." The grief in her voice was deep, layered, but threaded now with something new, relief. Daniel's fear had not been for nothing. The forest answered before either of them could speak again. Branches cracked, boots crunched through snow, not rushing now, but advancing in a deliberate, tightening arc. Shapes emerged between the trees, dark against the white, spreading out to cut off escape. John rose slowly, positioning himself in front of Mary and Max, one hand gripping the satchel strap, the other open and visible. He scanned quickly, counting, 5, then 6. 5. The men moved with practiced coordination, rifles low but ready, their faces masked by scarves and shadow. The leader stepped forward last, as if allowing the others to do the work of intimidation for him. He was tall, broad through the chest, with a posture that spoke of command rather than participation. His beard was neatly trimmed now, not wild like the man Max had tackled earlier, and flecked with silver that caught the light. Sharp gray eyes assessed the scene with calm interest, lingering on the satchel at John's feet. He wore a dark parka tailored for movement, not warmth alone, and his gloves were clean, almost pristine, as if he preferred distance from mess. This was not a man who panicked. This was a man who planned. "Well," he said, his voice smooth and carrying easily through the trees, "that saves us some time." He gave a small nod toward the bag. "You found it." John did not answer. He shifted his stance slightly, widening his base, a quiet signal of refusal. Max rose to his feet, hackles lifting, a low growl vibrating through his chest. Mary reached for the dog's collar instinctively, but Max did not move forward. He stayed close, eyes locked on the men ahead. "You don't know what you're holding," the leader continued, stepping closer, boots crunching softly. "That information belongs to people who will make very sure it never sees daylight. Hand it over, and you can all walk away, old woman included." His gaze flicked briefly to Mary, dismissive, calculating. Mary straightened, despite the tremor in her legs. She was small beside John, her frame slight, her hair silver and wind-tangled, but there was steel in her spine now. "My son died for that truth," she said, her voice thin but unwavering. "You don't get to bury him twice." The leader's expression hardened, just a fraction. "Your son made a poor decision," he replied evenly. "You're about to make another." John took one step forward, placing his body fully between Mary and the men. "You're done here," he said. "Law enforcement is on the way. You heard the sirens earlier. So did I." A ripple of unease moved through the group, small but noticeable. One of the men glanced over his shoulder toward the deeper woods, fingers tightening on his rifle. The leader noticed it too. His jaw tightened, but his composure didn't crack. "We've accounted for that," he said. "They're delayed. And even if they weren't, this would be over before they arrived." Snow thickened, swirling in lazy spirals between them, muting the world, reducing everything to breath and heartbeat. Max barked once, sharp and defiant, stepping forward half a pace before John's hand rested lightly on his neck. The dog's muscles trembled under the touch, held back by discipline learned through loyalty rather than training. The leader raised his hand slightly, signaling his men to spread wider. They moved without question, boots crunching into new positions, rifles lifting. The ring closed. John felt it as surely as if the trees themselves had leaned in. "Last chance," the leader said, his voice dropping, losing its pretense of politeness. He reached up with deliberate calm and worked the charging handle of his rifle. The sound cut cleanly through the snowfall, metallic and final. A round slid into place with a click that echoed far louder than the gunshot had earlier. "Step away from the bag." Mary's breath hitched. She clutched Max's collar, knuckles white. Max's growl deepened, a warning that vibrated in the air, teeth bared now, eyes bright with defiance. John did not step back. He planted his feet and met the leader's gaze, unblinking. Behind them, the forest remained blindingly white, snow falling without pause, indifferent to the line that had been drawn. The truth lay at John's feet, heavy and undeniable. And in the falling snow, with rifles raised and the leader's weapon now ready to fire, the final move waited to be made. The moment stretched thin, balanced on the metallic click of the rifle and the hush of falling snow. John did not move. He did not need to. The sound came first as a distant echo, then as a rising presence that cut through the white silence like a blade. Sirens, unmistakable and urgent, layered and approaching fast. Red and blue light flickered between the trees, refracted by snow and bark, turning the forest into a shifting mosaic. The leader's eyes tightened, a fraction too late, and John knew then that the window had closed. The forest erupted with motion. Voices shouted commands, clear, authoritative, practiced. "Federal agents, drop your weapons!" Boots pounded through snow as figures emerged from multiple angles, rifles trained, movements precise. The men who had surrounded John faltered, some lowering their weapons instinctively, others freezing where they stood. The leader cursed under his breath and took a half-step back, calculating, but there was nowhere left to calculate toward. The ring had reversed and it was closing on them. A woman stepped forward from the agents, tall and lean, her posture straight despite the uneven ground. Her name was Sarah Collins, and she carried herself with the quiet assurance of someone who had learned to speak once and be obeyed. She was in her early 40s, with auburn hair pulled into a tight braid that fell over the collar of her winter jacket, freckles dusting her pale skin, and eyes a sharp observant green that missed nothing. Years in federal investigations had etched a calm focus into her face. Whatever urgency lived inside her never rushed to the surface. She lifted her hand once, palm open, and her team responded instantly, tightening formation. "Now," Sarah said, her voice carrying through the trees without strain. "On the ground, slowly." The leader hesitated, pride flaring, then saw the angle of every rifle trained on him and made the wiser choice. He lowered his weapon. One by one, the men followed suit, hands raised, shoulders sagging as the inevitability settled in. Mary sank to her knees the moment the tension broke. She pressed her face into Max's neck and sobbed openly, the sound raw and unguarded. Max stood firm beneath her, tail wagging once, then settling as he leaned into her weight, his body a steady pillar. John released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding and knelt beside them, one hand resting on Mary's back, the other on Max's shoulder. The snow continued to fall, gentle now, as if the forest itself had softened. Agents moved efficiently, cuffing suspects, securing weapons, cataloging the satchel with practiced care. Sarah approached John last, her gaze moving from the bag to Mary and the dog, then back to John. "You sent the signal early," she said quietly, not a question. "Clean, precise. It gave us time." She extended a gloved hand. "Special Agent Sarah Collins." John shook it. John Miller. He did not add titles. He didn't need to. Sarah nodded once, as if that confirmed something she already knew. "We've been chasing this network for a long time," she said. "Your friend Daniel did more than he knew." Her eyes softened briefly as they moved to Mary. "I'm sorry for your loss." Mary lifted her head, eyes red but steady. "He believed in doing the right thing," she said, "even when it scared him." She placed her hand on the satchel. "This was his voice." "It will be heard," Sarah replied. "I promise." As the agents led the suspects away, the forest slowly reclaimed its quiet. The sirens faded to a distant hum, then disappeared entirely. The snow brightened as the sun climbed higher, the white world transformed from menace to peace. John stood with Mary and Max at the edge of the clearing, watching the last vehicle vanish between the trees. They returned to the cabin together. Inside, the fire still burned, a low, steady glow casting warmth across the wooden walls. John set fresh logs and brewed tea, the familiar ritual grounding him. Mary sat at the table, hands wrapped around the mug, shoulders finely relaxed. Max lay at her feet, eyes half closed, the tension of the chase draining from his body at last. "I don't know what comes next," Mary said quietly. "They'll ask questions. I'll answer them." She glanced around the room, then at John. "I won't be alone anymore, will I?" John met her gaze. He thought of the years he had spent choosing solitude, believing it was the same as peace. He looked at Max, whose steady breathing filled the room, and at Mary, whose grief had found a place to rest. "No," he said. "You won't." The days that followed were gentle. Agents returned briefly to finish their work, respectful and efficient. Sarah stopped by once more, without urgency this time, to thank John and confirm that the case had fractured the network beyond repair. She watched Mary laugh softly as Max nudged her hand for attention and smiled. "Looks like he chose his family," she said. When the cabin finally settled back into quiet, John stood on the porch and watched snow drift through sunlight. The woods felt different now, not emptied, but shared. He realized the decision had already been made, not in words, but in the way the fire burned brighter, in the way Max waited by the door for all of them, not just one. He stayed. He tended the cabin and the trails, became the steady presence the forest accepted without question. Mary found her rhythm again, slow mornings and warm evenings, stories told by the fire. Max took his place as guardian, not of secrets anymore, but of home. Winter remained cold, snow still fell, but the cabin glowed with a new warmth, born of truth carried safely to daylight, and of loyalty that had finally found where it belonged. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive with thunder or light from the sky. Sometimes, they come quietly, in the form of a knock on a door, a faithful dog, or a stranger who chooses kindness when fear would be easier. This story reminds us that God often works through ordinary people, through a man who opens his home, through an old woman who refuses to give up hope, through an animal guided by loyalty instead of words. In our daily lives, we may never face snowstorms like this one, but we all face moments when someone needs help, when truth feels heavy, and when doing the right thing costs us comfort. And yet, again and again, faith shows us the same truth. When we choose compassion, when we protect what is right, we are never truly alone. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from or what this story reminded you of in your own life. And if you believe that stories of faith, loyalty, and quiet courage still matter, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next one. May God bless you and your family. May He watch over you in the cold seasons and the warm ones alike. And may you always recognize the miracles He sends your way, even when they arrive softly like footsteps in the snow.